warm afternoon. Good afternoon to all the distinguished panelists and also the participants for joining for today's webinar. And let me welcome Mr. Najib, Mr. K Singh, Mr. Garg, Mr. Bose, Mr. Bimal, Jain, Mr. Vaitheeswaran, and Mr. Vijay Kumar. Of course, Mr. Sridhar will join us a little later. And a formal introduction of all the panelists because they are very well known for their insightful views in the domain of indirect taxation, and all of them have been contributing to various kinds of reforms in their indirect tax domain. And all of us know that the GST Council is having an exclusive session on Thursday on the compensation issue, which has unfortunately assumed a pandemic proportion of late in a couple of months. And several state finance ministers have sent strongly worded letters to the council's chairperson, particularly after the Attorney General's opinion has been making rounds in the media and been debated and discussed, interpreted. So in a nutshell, the Attorney General has stated that the Union of India is under no obligation, perhaps the constitutional obligation, to compensate for regions other than the regions having direct nexus with the expression called implementation of GST. So, I mean, that is the opinion perhaps he has given, and it's a corona time and the compensation pool has gone dry for the lack of economic activities in the economy and inability of the center to pay for the shortfall of GST collections. And it has led to very serious bickerings in the recent months. So let me start with Mr. Najib. Sir, you were party to the negotiations between the center and the states prior to the GST introduction. Now, how do you see this particular issue, which has become a raging brawl today?
Good afternoon, Shailendra, and good afternoon to a lot of good friends whom I'm seeing after a long time. I believe the compensation cess is the glue which holds GST together. There is no denying the fact that this was an issue which was debated and discussed, spread over the first 5-6 GST Council meetings. And this is an assurance which had to be given to the states and which was given by the center. The GST Council minutes will reveal the fact that the understanding, at least, and the AG is a learned officer, he knows best what he's saying, but the understanding definitely was that the center will honor its commitment of giving states at a very exaggerated rate of growth of 14%, but again, that was agreed to on a 15-16 base for a period of 5 years to compensate for all possible losses, because they will be coming into what will be a new levy, as it were. And the center has been, to be fair to the center, honoring that commitment till now, to the extent of dipping into the consolidated fund to make good 60,000-70,000 crores, which was the shortfall for the period ending last year. So they have honored this commitment. We have a serious crisis now, like you rightly pointed out. There is simply no money. We'll talk of the solutions later when we come around next as to what can be the possible solutions. But my belief is that the center has to honor that commitment. The then FM, who chaired the meetings consistently, had suggested it. The Constitutional Amendment Act also suggests that that compensation will be given. The cess Act was created only to fund that compensation. You could suggest that if the money is not sufficiently there in the compensation cess amount, how do you go about it? Which are now we're looking at solutions. But my basic belief is that money has to be given by the sector, and I believe that they will try to honor that commitment.
Right. Thank you, sir. So, sir, we have Mr. Garg with us, who presently represents the government of Punjab, and he is also a very well-known indirect tax expert, and he is known for giving very innovative solutions to a variety of technical issues. So, let me request Mr. Garg to, sir, prima facie, what is your comment on this issue, sir?
Yeah, good afternoon, Shailendra, and good afternoon, all the panelists. See, our task has been made very easy by the present finance minister by an article she wrote yesterday. It has appeared in the Indian Express, and I suppose it could have appeared in the other newspapers also. What she has written in the article is she has quoted Mr. Jaitley, his remarks at the 8th council meetings, where the then FM had said categorically that full compensation shall be paid, and the full compensation shall be paid within 5 years. And not only that, and if necessary, money will be borrowed for this purpose. So a lot of misgivings that I think people had, if you read this statement, coming up from the present finance minister, quoting a very respectable and late former finance minister, I think it creates an impression that the AG's opinion that is being cited as if center has no obligation to pay GST, I think that might be put at the back burner. My personal opinion is that many times, legal opinions are based on the law in the form and manner it has been written. But this is a very unique law. There is something contained in the constitutional amendment. There is something contained in the GST Compensation Act. And there is something hidden or maybe contained in the minutes of the council. Usually, a law officer shall not bother about the council minutes. However, when the law is written in a manner, the constitutional amendment says Parliament shall by law, on the recommendations of the GST Council, provide for compensation, so on and so forth. So if the recommendation of the council says something and the law is falling short of that recommendation, then that law, in my opinion, shall also be falling short of the constitutional requirement. But these are issues that will be debated. I don't think there'll be a need to argue on that aspect at all, because the statement that has come in the yesterday's newspaper is to find out a way forward, how exactly states and center should put together, and first of all, recognize the present magnitude of the problem and what exactly can be done. Only one more point. We also need to be cognizant of the CAG's report that was given in March 2018, in which they had pointed out that an amount of 1,76,000 crores of IGST, not a small amount, 1,76,000 crores of IGST was taken directly to the Consolidated Fund of India in violation of the constitutional provisions. I'm not talking of any accounting requirements. I'm not talking of any other law, constitutional requirements, which is 269A, Article 269A, that was meant to be distributed half to the states, half to the center, and then states were supposed to get 42% of only the half. That error or mistake has finally been admitted by the central government, and that amount is being restored into the compensation kitty. If 88,000 crores are restored into the compensation kitty, and some of it has already been done in the month of April, and therefore they could release the compensation for the up to March, and then we have at least finished with the arrears of the last year. So in my understanding, they still would have quite a bit of money from that fund to take care of compensation till, let us say, July of this year or so. But we have to find out way forward for compensation from August onwards. Probably at that time we can talk about some solutions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, sir. So let's hear from other side of the fence also, how exactly some of the professionals look at it. Mr. Vaitheeswaran is with us. Sir, how do you look at this issue?
Thank you, Mr. Shailendra, and good afternoon to all the panels. Thank you for having me here. Firstly, I think both the two speakers have set the tone correctly, and maybe we are debating a non-issue in that sense, if you go by what the article which Mr. now referred to. But I would go by from a pure constitutional perspective. There's a lot of history. Look at the 2014 bill. The two sections that was originally part of the bill, Section 18 and Section 19 of the Constitutional Amendment Bill. When Section 19 actually proposed a 1% additional levy or an additional tax to be retained by the states in the type of CST. And it went to the Select Committee, and the Select Committee extensively debated it before the Rajya Sabha Select Committee. The Select Committee finally, and it was agreed that given the fact that compensation is getting guaranteed There is no necessity for this 1% levy. And that is how Section 18 was born. And Section 18 of the Constitution Amendment Bill, as approved by the Select Committee, is very clear that Parliament shall, by law, provide for compensation. And it also fixed the period up to 5 years. Two critical things happen in the Select Committee, and that is the Parliament by law fixing the compensation. And I mean, talking about the compensation, and also the period of 5 years. Once the Section 18 of the Constitution Amendment Act 2016 got enacted, it is virtually a constitutional guarantee that the union has committed that it will honor and pay the compensation as promised. And of course, compensation is loss on account of implementation of GST. I'm sure there'll be legal interpretation as to what is arising out of implementation of GST. The word arising was also added. It was not there before. In a lot of committee meetings, if you see of the GST Council, arising word came at the fag end. It was not there before in the papers. So arising out of implemented GST, vis-a-vis COVID-related losses, both can be a huge debate. But I don't think one can go back and say that 14% was wrong and it is a higher figure compared to what would normally happen. The state's cooperation was needed. The assurance of compensation was a critical element, most critical element for implementation. States came on board and gave up their significant powers of taxation only on the premise that the compensation is guaranteed through the Constitution. So I don't think there is any thought process with the center to go back on it. There could be a lot of political press debates, etc. But as Mr. Garg was rightly saying, going forward, where is the money going to come from is going to be the topic for this.
Right, sir. So, I mean, this you have set the tone, sir, the arising. Maybe I would like to go to Mr. R.K. Singh, sir. So a lot of problems are arising here. How do you look at it?
The good afternoon is deemed to have been said to all. First of all, this is only a day after yesterday when 1 year ago our former Prime Minister passed away. And it's good to recall about his brilliance and negotiating skills and persuasive skills and prevaricating skills and his stature and across the aisle acceptability, which is reflected if you look at the Compensation Act. It's the only act where I find that in the case of a break of a promise, it is not only the promiser, but the promisee is also made equally accountable, which is a brilliant piece of legislation. Because after all, the whole thing has to be paid out of the compensation cess fund, which is Section 10. And Section 10 says in this fund, money will come from the cess and any other amount approved by the council. The rates are approved by the council. So in effect, whatever money is available also depends upon the council's decisions in this regard. What to tax, which goods to tax on the compensation cess. That is one aspect. Second aspect is that is there something called force majeure? In case of this kind of a crisis, can we hold down to those promises where nobody could have actually anticipated this kind of catastrophe? But having said all this, and the legal interpretations apart, if you want to indulge in the legal interpretation of the whole act and constitution and everything, you are already lost the game. This is a political issue. And if you won the legal argument, you would be losing the political space in a very big way. And everybody is in a very dire state. States are in a particularly dire state. And nobody can hold a starving person to law. A starving person will be compelled to break the law if it comes to survival. And if that happens, even if in a trickle, if few states go, to use the wrong word, rogue, and start implementing their own GST rates, then it will completely undo such a great hard work. And therefore, to my mind, the test of the statesmanship comes only in case of crisis, when everything is going hunky-dory. Nobody is needed. For the first 2 years, for example, the compensation cess collection was more than what was required to be paid to states. Everybody was happy. So when the crisis has come, that's the time when the statesmanship has to be shown. And come what may, the center, either by persuading the states voluntarily in a pleasant manner to their acceptability, persuade them to accept lower compensation, that is one possibility. But if the states are adamant, and they're not willing to be persuaded, in that case, the center does not have, politically speaking, does not have any space to maneuver. They have to come up with the money, they have to make effort for it, and fulfill the promise. Thank you.
Absolutely fine, sir. So, I mean, sir, this, what you have said is that the onus falls on Mr. Bimal Jain now. I mean, the industry and trade and the taxpayers. Ultimately, you know, I mean, we are talking out so far about the states and, you know, center, the accounts, but actually, whoever accounts it is, but, you know, the taxpayers will have to credit the money. So, Bimal ji, how do you look at it?
Thank you, Shailendra ji, and thanks to all the learned panelists here today. Important is, see, we have seen the biggest indirect tax revolution since independence from July 1, 2017. Now, this compensation cess was negotiated between center and state both together. They have agreed for 14% year-on-year growth, 5 years commitment given by center to the state. Now, when we are in a crisis situation, if we look at the numbers, how much money we got collected in 17-18 and paid to the state. 17-18, we collected around 62,000 crore and paid around 41,000 crore. 18-19, we have collected 95,000 crore and cess paid 69,000 crore. No problem that time. Problem started from 2019-20. We collected only 95,000 crore and paid around 1.65 lakh crore. And now we are into pandemic situation. Now, question is, can we undo something which we have done with a lot of negotiation, lot of consensus made between center and state? And former finance minister has stated, which is rightly said by Mr. B.K. Garg, that this compensation cess is ensured for the 5 years. If there is any shortfall, then the borrowing, maybe the option can be looked at. So what is the way forward as of now? What I feel like GST got introduced after a lot of discussion, a lot of promises, a lot of discussion between center and state, and stakeholder like trade, industry, and commerce were the part of all negotiation. We do not want to see any kind of crisis coming just because of compensation cess. We are undoing the thing which is being done with a lot of hard work. Now, if there's shortfall in compensation cess, maybe the right region, 14%. Somebody can say 14% is a really too high a rate, but this has been negotiated now. Looking at the position, pandemic, corona position now, revenue is going down. Can center and state come together and negotiate the subject matter in an amicable manner? GST Council, all the GST Council meeting except lottery matter, we have seen they have decided everything by consensus. So any difference which is coming out on account of revenue shortfall happening for both center and state, they should work out something between themselves as a consensus rather than coming in a public media and then starting political debate as ruling party and non-ruling party. My humble submission would be from trade, industry, and commerce, we really want to see this GST should settle down as fast as possible. Pandemic corona was unwanted. It's unfortunate for all of us together worldwide. What we have to do, and we have to see, if 14% is too high a rate, they can sit down once again. And you started your dialogue, Mr. Shailendra ji, that AG has said not obligated. Such kind of statements coming on a public fora, public platform, that is, with due respect to him, I'm not countering him, but I'm saying that GST Council, where center and state sitting together, deciding everything by consensus, this may be one of the issue. And I'm really throwing one more challenge to all the panelists. Why we are talking about that this is revenue shortfall? Why can't we look at the part where revenue can be increased? What are the ways and means we can increase the revenue and compensate to the state? It is the responsibility and duty of both center and state to work out something whereby revenue is increased and these issues can be sorted out in amicable manner. I do agree, compensation cess as agreed by Compensation Cess Act, 5 years promise, 14% growth is being promised. What is the way forward? Maybe center can look at the borrowing option, but that is again being debated. Maybe state can look at some other option. I'm not going to solution part at the moment, which we will discuss later. We'll discuss later. But yes, I'm saying that whatever we have done, the great work of GST introduction in the country has been done. This should be taken forward amicably by both center and state.
Perfect. Thank you, Bimalji. Rajat, you have the advantage of listening to all the panelists. So you would like to add a few words here?
Sure, Shailendra. Thank you so much. And welcome to all the attendees. Very good afternoon. You see, my perspective on this is that when the GST was introduced, it was a collective effort of all the states and the center. The GST Council, as Bimalji rightly said, so far only apart from the lottery issue and everything else, there has been a unanimous decision taken for all the decisions which have been taken by the GST Council. One of the main fundamental, one of the fundamentals of GST in India was that it's something which is uniform in nature. So when we talk about compensating the states from the center, in my view, it is more of a collective effort, because the compensation cess is not just the responsibility of the center to generate that cess. It's basically a cess on the supply of the specific goods, and the states are equally responsible to ensure that there is revenue generation, enough revenue generation, so that the cess collection is also robust. So I think just pinpointing all the the entire blame on the center that there's a revenue shortfall, I don't think that is the correct approach, even as far as the states are concerned. I think the center and the states both have to collectively figure out a way where the revenue can be augmented, look at the measures by which revenue can be increased, look at where the leakages are happening, try and stop any kind of evasion or other kinds of frauds which are happening, so that the revenue is generated. Of course, these are times when we also need to be careful about what kind of measures are taken to generate the revenue, as it may have an impact directly on the consumers. So therefore, that step has to be also carefully chosen and taken. But yes, it's a collective responsibility. The states and the center should work collectively towards putting in measures where cess collection can be increased and the shortfall can be made good in that fashion.
Thank you, Rajat. I have my colleague Mr. Vijay Kumar with me of a very popular column called Daily Dose of Taxation. So, sir, today I will request you to give us some brief dose of taxation on this issue.
And we have, I think I would like to recall, in 2014, Mr. Arun Jaitley made a statement in Parliament that the major impediment to GST was the trust deficit. The earlier finance minister, Mr. Chidambaram, did not give the promised CST compensation. And Mr. Jaitley took upon himself the job of paying those dues. And it is only after that the state governments agreed to join the GST stream. And now it's a commitment. I don't think there's any way the central government can get out of it in spite of the COVID. And COVID, unfortunately, is not the unique experience of the central government. If central government doesn't have funds, the state governments also do not have funds. And what you have promised, you have to give. I would also like to recall what Mr. Arvind Subramaniam wrote yesterday in the Indian Express, which I'm sure many of us must have read. He said, now even if you ask for a cut for a brief period, the states may not agree because that will continue. There is a trust deficit. I think and he says, if each state government starts levying its own rates, GST will be dead. And I think we have to seriously take that warning. We should keep it alive. And maybe the central government should find the funds to give to the states. There's no need of any discussion for that.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. So let me go to Mr. Najib Shah, sir. I mean, I would like to touch that, and where we will also lace it with, the Attorney General's opinion that, because ultimately the compensation pool garners revenue from the compensation cess. So what are the options? How do you look at it, sir? the compensation cess, because the given the state of the economy, which is quite precarious presently, compensation cess, can it be hiked? Can it be extended? Or maybe its basket could be perhaps expanded in such a way that more goods could be brought under this basket, or the existing specified goods where the ceiling threshold rates are yet to be raised to that level. So what are the possible solutions before the council?
You see, it'll be nice to recall also the fact that the compensation cess matter, when it was discussed, quite frankly, the understanding of the center was that the compensation will be required for a few manufacturing states. We never thought that, for instance, last year's compensation has gone to states like Tirupura also. In the scheme of things, it was never thought that we would come to such a state of affairs that apart from the major manufacturing states, you'll also be giving compensation to a whole host of states who are never in the scheme of things, which means the point I'm only trying to make is that the requirement of compensation dramatically increased. And of course, the economic crisis, which everybody, the center and the states, are facing, is responsible for this shortfall in revenue. Solutions are the center really has put itself in a little corner. Solutions are very, very going to be difficult. They have to sit to the states. I would suggest start off. R.K. Singh mentioned about force majeure. It is a fact of life. In any contractual obligation, you have this clause written or unwritten. It is always there. If circumstances beyond your control come into play, you can look at your contract, you can look at your negotiations and make them understand that it's not as much their problem as much as the center's problem. The center needs to be very, very transparent about in this entire matter. It has to come with its hands clean to say, look, we wish to compensate you. Help us now reach at solutions. I'm sure a lot of states will agree for some sort of relaxation, if I may use the word, of this 14%, if at all. If that doesn't work out, look at borrowing, look at extending this period of 5 years, or if the center were to borrow, look at getting that money back into the compensation pool through imposition of cess, which money will go directly money for funding back that borrowing which they have to get. Because obviously, you're going to borrow from the market, somebody has to pay for it, with the interest and the money itself. So solutions are difficult, but once the center commits itself transparently to honoring its commitment and saying, look, we wish to give you the money. And like Vijay mentioned, the finance minister yesterday made it clear that the center wishes to repay that money, give the compensation. So I hope that this gets sorted out and this doesn't, because as I mentioned, this is the glue which holds the GST together. The last thing you want is the states to go off in a different path. That will be disastrous for the country.
Right, sir. So, but sir, this compensation cess, I mean, do you think the council, it's the right time for the council to increase the compensation cess quantum? We have in certain cases a specific rate and in certain cases ad valorem, and on certain items, perhaps that could be one option to garner extra revenue for the kitty.
I don't know who will accept it, neither the center nor the states. Ideally, that can be done. You can keep increasing the rates till you fulfill the requirement of compensation. But will it pass politically at this point of time? I really don't think so. I mean, I wonder. Mr. Arvind Subramaniam again has talked of a single rate of 16 with 15, 16, 17 with outliers on either side. Will this be the time again for them to do it? Will this be the time for us to increase the GST coverage to petroleum products, land, electricity, which have been discussed so many times? Because remember, if you bring in all these commodities, the requirement of compensation may perhaps come down. But having said that, petroleum products gives VAT, a lot of states, a lot of VAT revenue, and the center, a lot of central excise revenue, all of which will come into the GST pool. So it may work both ways. So yes, you can increase the GST rates, you can increase the GST compensation pool in terms of the number of commodities, but these are very, very difficult calls. I think it will be easier for them to sit down to look at the rate itself of 14% than rather than any of these other things. I don't know. I mean, I think the center and the states have a tough task ahead of them.
Right. So let me go to Mr. VK Garg. Sir, I mean, as rightly pointed out by Mr. Najib sir, that whether this is the right time to expand the basket of product. Let's presume, sir, that the basket of products are not expanded, but we can identify certain seen goods where perhaps the sales quantum could be increased to certain level, because there is still a lot of space as per the provision. And that could be possible. For instance, pan masala, then we have tobacco products, etc. These are seen goods where, in any case, we don't meet the WHO's threshold of 75% taxation. India is a signatory to that, the framework convention of the tobacco control, which recommends 75%. We have not reached that level. So there is still, some head space where perhaps, the GST Council may explore for this. So let me go to Mr. Vijay. Sir, how do you look at it?
Shailendra, let's first try to understand what is the magnitude of the problem, and therefore we'll talk about what kind of solution will at least part satisfy people. If there were to be no COVID, what would have been the amount of compensation that would have been ordinarily required? My estimate is somewhere between 16,000 to 17,000 crores per month without COVID. What is the amount of cess that we are collecting as of today? 8,000 crores. It would have also gone down due to COVID, but let's say keep the COVID aspect apart. We'll tackle it separately. So we were collecting 45% of what we are supposed to give. So even if force majeure, etc., with which I have serious difference of views, we require close to 9,000 crores of additional cess. That money cannot come from pan masala. That money cannot come even if we double all the cesses as of today. That requires a completely different approach. The second part that we need to be, one of the problem with GST is we face a problem, we fix it that day, and then the same problem creates some other problem somewhere else. We start fixing that. It's like, applying punctures. That will never give solutions. That is one of the problems with the GST. Now, all the states, all the union territories are seeking compensation. And if everybody was seeking compensation prior to COVID, and by no small amounts, most people were, falling 20% short, 25% short, etc. And we also need to be cognizant of the fact that this 20% or so was after taking provisional IGST. Provisional IGST is more or less like a one-time IGST, which is the IGST lying in the pipeline, meant to be refunded on exports, meant to be lying in unsold stocks and so on and so forth, which we got in the initial years, which will never be available. In fact, it will become negative as time passes. So if after giving provisional IGSTs, we have this kind of a deficit, it means, in my understanding, that the basic foundation of GST is faulty. This has been commented to by RBI, this has been commented to by CAG. They have compared the pre-GST taxes with the post-GST and given a feedback that possibly GST rates are 25 to 30% lower than the pre-GST rate. Anybody will tell you, you can't have the cake and eat it too. You can't have a situation where everybody is seeking a compensation and then you say, I don't want to do this and that. I think the first attempt should be, and this need not be in this meeting, this should be at least going forward in the next 9 months or so that in the 5th year, people feel a little confident and relaxed that something has been done. So my suggestion would be that vision will be half the does not require compensation. I'm not using the word half the states, because the bottom 15 states are only 8 to 10% of the total revenue of India. Half the revenue of the country should come without compensation. Then you would say at least half the revenue does not require compensation. Other states have got some abnormality or the other, some structural flaw or the other. Let us fix that. Otherwise, I don't think we are striving for a solution. Solutions can be many. So we have to also therefore explore whether SGST rates needs to be a little higher than the CGST rates. Because if everybody is short, that means SGST rates are not proper. Maybe instead of 9 plus 9, you go to 9 plus 10, and maybe 1% higher in each of the brackets and so on and so forth. So you allow states to gather. compensation is an exceptional solution. Compensation is not a normal solution for anybody.
Right. So let me go to Mr. R.K. Singh. Sir, and Mr. Vijay suggested that that the bedrock itself has certain flaws, the foundation on which the whole thing was built. And the fact that every state is looking for compensation, that means that there are certain serious, lacuna somewhere in the entire design. So, but sir, of course, I mean, that calls for a separate, webinar and discussion on that, and perhaps, a long-term solution. But for this compensation issue, we are looking for a short-term, quickly, how to satisfy the states and meet partly, at least for some time. As you suggested that maybe in next 8 to 9 months, or maybe, going forward 5th year or something, some long-term solution could be perhaps worked out. But at present, the issue is that compensation kitty is dry, and there is a need for revenue. And of course, I mean, given the state of the health of the economy, of course, raising duty politically, perhaps it will be fraught with too many risks. I mean, no political party would like to do that. So, what are the options? How do you look at the options, sir? In fact, let's look at the kitty, sir, and how to ensure the buoyancy in the kitty. Where exactly the revenue can come from, for short term at least, which could take care of the present crisis. Sir, your audio, sir.
Oh, sorry. I must first compliment Mr. Garg for plugging in state's case here. But having said that, sometimes, Shailendra, the best solutions come from the people who know the least, and I know the least here. If you look at the Compensation Cess Act, it's a beautifully designed act. It only promises 5 years period for giving compensation, but it does not restrict imposition of cess for 5 years. You can impose cess indefinitely, perpetually. What does it mean? It means that after 5 years, your cess can continue. You're not paying out anything, which means there is a constant stream of income coming in. And therefore, it should be very easy to borrow from the market, because you'll be able to repay after 5 years. There will be no other outgo. So I do not see great difficulty in borrowing, but I totally agree with Mr. Garg that putting the burden on the states, instead of each state borrowing, why not central borrow and then pay out of the stream which will come after 5 years in the form of Section 8(1) does not restrict the imposition of cess for 5 years. So that is one very, very straight solution as far as I'm concerned. And I don't see any difficulty at all as to why it should not be explored. About the other thing, see, the whole debate that it's a center versus state, to me, is factually incorrect. This is a problem for GST Council, of GST Council, and by GST Council. If you look at the Act, whatever cess is to be imposed by GST Council. How much money will come is to be decided by GST Council. Which money will come in the GST cess fund is to be decided by GST Council. Which products will be leviable to cess is by GST Council. So the whole, basically, it's the problem of GST Council to be sorted out by GST Council. I do not see why this central state thing is coming in this fashion. Is a GST Council meeting taking place? And as I said, borrowing seems to be an easy option because the stream of income to repay it is guaranteed by the GST Act, which can be continued even after 5 years.
That's fine, sir. So you are supporting the concept of borrowing, which has been suggested by even the
center, not by states.
Not by state. I mean, again, that is to be decided by the council, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a part of that, sir. Yes.
Absolutely.
But you are not suggesting, sir, any hike in the duty rates for Singh goods or something, sir, demerit goods?
See, as Mr. Garg said, and I did some back of the envelope calculations. If you hike the rates on the existing cess products, it won't give you nearly enough. It will give you minor amounts, which will not be of any consequence. We are looking at around 3 lakh crores shortfall in the compensation cess account. That kind of money will come only through borrowings. Hiking the rates, number one, is politically not very wise. And at this juncture, particularly, so when you are giving financial incentive to the trade, hiking rates will be totally counterproductive.
Even
So
for
that
the
solution, I don't.
You are
Yeah,
saying
even
same goods is not shareable.
actually, sin goods have been already so much sinned that you can't sin anymore. There's so much of extra cess is already imposed on sin goods. In fact, the goods should be offended by being called sin goods.
Right. Okay. Okay. So let me go to Mr. Vaitheeswaran, sir. I mean, how do you look at this issue, sir? Where exactly the money can come from, apart from the borrowing? Borrowing is, of course, one option, that we are snatching somebody's money and we are promising that we will return it, you know. But if somebody behaves like the center, that tomorrow you don't return, what is happening to the, you know, the state? But anyway, I mean, that issue is separate. But, you know, I mean, how do you look at this issue? Where exactly the money can come from in the compensation pool, apart from borrowing?
Quickly reacting to what the other two panelists spoke on this, while I do agree that GST Council has got a critical role to play on the compensation, and the compensation cess is a vehicle. At best, it is only a vehicle that was arrived at as a solution. Primary commitment was to pay compensation. Compensation cess was a solution which the central government chose because there was the only other alternative at that point of time. Otherwise, it was a commitment in the parliament as well as the constitution that the center will guarantee the compensation. Therefore, the cess cannot be all and only one, which decides everything. That if I don't have cess, I cannot pay compensation. So, as rightly put by Mr. Najib, Shah and others, I don't think the center is going back on their terminology, but they're looking at whether negotiation is possible. This is all speculation right now. But force major, I don't think it's going to work in these kind of circumstances. While everybody can say, look, COVID, nobody expected COVID to happen. What can we do? Let's look at what's happening in the courts today. All petitions filed based on COVID, saying that an importer goes to court, saying that I'm not going to pay the foreign supplier because I imported the steel when the prices were different and COVID has changed it, and therefore I can't honor the bank guarantee. The court just threw out the petition. They said that this is your circumstances. Things have changed. So if contracting parties are not allowed to go back, despite their clauses which talk about force major and interpretation, this is a constitutional aspect which cannot be subject to a force major. So I'm very clear that the compensation is a non-negotiable point or a non-discussion point. How to fund it is a very important question. I don't think that, as Mr. Singh rightly said, you can't keep on looking at some of these goods. For example, there were news reports saying that the luxury two-wheeler is looking at exiting India because market is not there. So if that is the kind of news reports you're getting, that some of the luxury goods don't find market here, what is the point of imposing further cess on such goods if you're not going to generate revenue? Now, with reference to the thought process that we can have an additional 1% SGST rate, which will help the states to garner revenue. I agree on the point that compensation is a solution and the tax revenues buoyancy must take care of it. But if you allow an increase by 1% by states, then you will have the rate of tax war once again, which is banking on the investment platform. Each state is competing today for investment, and you will soon find that one state would say that neighboring states have this additional rate, I'm not having this rate, why didn't invest in my country? You will have nightmare as to what is the IGST rate. Should we take the originating state rate plus destination rate state, or what is the rate of tax that you take? So I don't think we should unravel what all you have done so well, that the center rate and the state rate is equal and the IGST is a summation of both these things. Not tinker with that. Maybe look at how the tax buoyancy can be increased despite the COVID. I know it is not the right topic to talk about. Somewhere I think we've lost the picture. What is the picture? The whole idea of GST was we'll increase the tax base. We'll have the entire supply chain taxed. We'll have everybody into the tax net. Therefore, there's an equitable collection of tax across the entire supply chain. Have we achieved that? Now, that's a very important question. And over a period of time, we have expanded the scope of composition scheme. It is goods or service, etc. We feel that the composition scheme is a very good solution. Composition scheme is again a breakaway from the system. A 5% scheme without ITC is a breakaway from the system. So we have started GST at every stage. Ideal GST would be to ensure that the rates are low and the implementation is so smooth that the taxpayer does not face the impact of it. So somewhere I think the GST and also has to take the blame. The technology also has to take the blame in terms of making the law complicated. So if we can get back to the drawing board again, and see how we can revamp the system and make it even more simpler than what it is, than making it so complicated, and increase the tax base, then as everybody said, tax collections would take care by bringing down the claim for compensation. But you will have to face the current battle of the next 2 years, whereas most of the states have increased the demands of compensation. My prediction is that there will be all kinds of cess on commodities which are hitherto not at all covered, or probably even services are not all covered. Though there is very little room left because travel, entertainment, and all those sectors which are typically prone for all these kind of levies are all hit. They're almost broken. You can't get back any kind of revenue from the normal tax itself. It's going to be a huge nightmare, but I'm sure they will discover new categories of goods or services on which they can levy the tax. Some bridgeway will happen, and probably some restructuring of rates might also happen. 12 and 18 could probably merge together and become 15, where say 15 or 16, where some jump in the rate of 12 to 16 could give them some kind of tax revenue. Some kind of rejig is definitely going to be on the cards.
Right. Thank you, sir. So Rajat, how do you look at it? The fact that we have a compensation kitty, and the compensation says for this purpose, for levying compensation says certain items were identified and called sin goods. Although Mr. Akash disagreed with that, but they were called sin goods, I think, largely because they do have some indirect economic cost for the economy, for the society at large. And someday, like automobile, for instance, they were asked to pay because of this carbon emission, their ability to damage, the climate. And similarly, the smoke, cigarette, tobacco products, pan masala, etc., aerated drinks, etc. The whole concept was all of them are having indirect economic cost for the society. And so how do you look at this? My concern is where exactly the GST Council is going to find the revenue. Maybe partly, not too much perhaps, but even if let's say around 8,000 crore is the monthly collection, if it becomes 12 to 13,000 crore, then the need for borrowing perhaps will come down to another 3,000-4,000 crore. So borrowing 8,000 crore or borrowing 4,000 crore, the debt servicing will be a little more manageable. So Rajat, how do you look at it? What is your take on this?
It's actually interesting because as you rightly said, there cannot be any one particular solution to this. It has to be a combination of 2 or 3 different measures which the government would need to take now. But there is one thing which I wanted to sort of share over here is that we all agree that somewhere at the time of implementation we got the projected growth rate incorrect. I think it was much on the higher side. 14% is something which probably even the center admits that it was on the higher side, and probably that was on the higher side because they wanted a quick consensus from the states to go in for GST. Now the question is that if at that point of time you agreed at a higher rate of 14%, and now that you cannot fulfill that commitment, is it now fair on your part to push that button on the taxpayer in the sense that, do you actually really want to increase the taxes because you have a shortfall, because your rate of, growth rate that you projected was 14%, and because of that there is a shortfall. So now do you want to increase the taxes so that the consumer has to pay for that, miscalculation which you did 3 years back? So I think, as far as the legality is concerned, that's on one side, but from an equity perspective, I think it's something which we need to ponder about, that how fair is it to increase the taxes to make for the shortfall on the compensation cess. Now, having said that, the other thing which I wanted to sort of point out over here is that why was it agreed between the center and the states for a period of 5 years that there will be a compensation? Why wasn't a longer period agreed at that point of time? And what stops the government from increasing that 5-year period to, let's say, 8-year period or 10-year period? See, at the end of it, we need to also see that increasing the tax rate may not be the best solution, given the current situation. And whether it's on sin goods or whether you want to increase the base or the cess, etc., whatever it is, I think either ways it's not a very great idea to do it at this point of time. Secondly, I think we have only seen 3 or 4 months where there was a sort of a lockdown and the economic activity was very subdued, and because of which the collections were not great. But apart from that, I think we are speaking too soon. Maybe we need to give it some more time, see how the economy reacts in the coming 7-8 months, 1 year, 2 years. Maybe the situation improves. There can be a temporary lull in collection, but again, the collections can go up in the years to come. We still have 2 more years for the compensation cess to be sort of levied. So, I think right now it's a little too early to jump onto conclusion or to find a quick fix solution. The solution has to be sustainable. But in my view, increasing the tax rate is not the best solution. yes, maybe you can look at increase in the tax, increase in the period for collection from 5 years to maybe 7 years or 8 years, till you can make good the loss which you have promised. And another thing which I would like to point out, as Mr. Singh said, that Section 8 does not have any restriction on levy of cess. I think, sir, Section 8 one does have a sunset clause of 5 years as far as the levy of cess is concerned. But it also says a period of 5 years or for such period as may be prescribed by the recommendation of the council. So the period can of course be increased from 5 years as well. I think what the government needs to look at is, apart from increasing the rate of cess or the rate of SGST, is there any other way? Of course, borrowing can be there to an extent, but borrowing has to also be funded later on, and that has to be repaid back, whether from cess or from any other means. So that has to be taken into consideration. But apart from that, it may not really be fair to push this burden on the end consumer and say that, okay, sorry, we made a mistake by miscalculating the growth rate, so now you please pay for it. So I think that is not the best solution.
Okay. Thank you. So let me go to a little scared taxpayer. We have the person who is representing the community of taxpayers. Mr. Bimal Jain. How do you look at it? What is your because the question is not that what is needed presently is the money. In future, perhaps there would be buoyancy. We can recover. There could be better growth rate, etc. But what about the backlog? That the huge backlog on the back of the center is perhaps the biggest back-breaking issue here. So I mean, somehow we have to find a solution for that, because borrowing could be one option. Yes, I mean, all of us agree that borrowing could be one option. Raising the tax rate even on sin good is not a very good idea. Some of you are of this opinion. So maybe Bimal Jain perhaps could throw some light on this.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me pick up the clue. Mr. Najib Shah said that the compensation cess initially thought of only to compensate to manufacturing state. And then I heard Mr. BK Garg, he started saying that there's 8,000 crore rupees per month differential in terms of collection versus disbursement. And then he suggested that 1%, 2% additionally can be given in SGST, incremental. Now, having said that, you also suggested can be increased compensation cess on sin product like pan masala and tobacco.
Right.
So when we are having this kind of background and we are looking at compensation cess to be compensated as promised to the state for 5 years with 14% year-on-year growth, my suggestion would be the first one. Why we are talking about only to look at compensating by way of borrowing and other stuff? Why can't we look at, we have to really take the measures to boost the economy, GDP, our gross supply of goods and services, so that revenue should be increased. We have seen that we have promised 2% incremental. We thought of initially 2% incremental GDP growth by introduction of GST, which we are not being able to collect. I'm not saying that that GST, that system framework was not good, not correct. It is all well thought of, well discussed by all learned person. Now, after 3 years, if we start discussing that whatever we thought of was not correct, then we have to start rethinking where we should go for it. So increasing the compensation cess on certain sin product, not advisable. For simple reason that you got a differential of 8,000 crore. Now, what government should look at, both government, center and state, is not the only responsibility of central government, it's the responsibility of state government also to ensure that we can boost the economy, increase our contribution to the supply of goods and services. By increasing the rate, you will not achieve. For simple reason, what we are sounding as of now during COVID-19 time period, that the supply is available, but demand is not available. How to boost the demand? Industry is looking for rationalization of GST rate, which we are talking about. What we are saying that you should decrease GST rate by 20 to 25% so that we can boost the demand and get the incremental revenue. That is what the counter, demand of trade, industry and commerce. So at this point of time, during COVID-19, it is not advisable that we should look at increasing compensation cess, even for the sin product, and by increasing how much we are going to collect it. We have to go back and check out our own working formula, whether that formula is correct or not. Second, 14% growth, which we have thought of. Why can't we go back and discuss in GST Council If we all think that this working was not correct, this was only mean for manufacturing state, now we are compensating to other state, why can't we discuss in the GST Council, center and state both together? Boss, I promised 14%, and these were the parameters we discussed, but we are not finding it. So can we think of doing certain, reworking, renegotiation? I'm not saying force major. Mr. Vaitheeswaran said it's not for, even I'm not suggesting. We can always renegotiate the price. Today, I'm from trade, industry and commerce. I'm telling you to achieve the target, we are renegotiating our pricing for supply of goods and services. When something crisis comes up, why can't both the government come together and renegotiate? That's the point I'm making here. Third point, Mr. R.K. Singh has said one thing, that can we increase the period for collection of this compensation cess? This looks to me more realistic position as of now. Without touching anything, if both can decide, increase the time period to compensate to the state. And within, after 1 or 2 years, we can see the visibility of revenue collection. And we all are hopeful that we will come back and we will have the targeted GDP growth and accordingly the collection. Now, coming on the last point, which I want to draw here for all the panelists, something which has created a crisis for all of us together. Taking borrowing, this is one of the major which we thought of. Taking borrowing either by center or by state. But if center is playing a role of big father, they can take the borrowing and compensate, and whatever collection made after 5 years, that can be paid off with the interest, as Mr. R.K. Singh suggested. I'm only saying that at this point of time, what we have to look at, how we can boost the economy, GDP growth, and revenue collection. And then in case our revenue collection goes up, which we all are targeting, we can meet out all this revenue shortfall which is happening. If state is also doing certain measures from their side along with the center, then what happened? We both can come together and play important pivotal role to come out of this crisis situation. What is my suggestion in forthcoming GST Council meeting? We should not be stagnant. We should not be rigid. Even center should be willing to listen to the state, and state should be willing to listen to the center. And that is the way we can look at, renegotiate, and talk together with a fresh mind. Boss, this is the situation, this is a platter. Center and state both has to survive with the help of trade, industry and commerce. And you have to really look after the trade, industry and commerce. Whatever revenue collection you're talking about, increasing the rate or whatever major you're talking about, if industry survive, everything will survive. So you have to make sure that nothing going contrary and negative to the industry. Industry must be given proper support. This rate increase of SGST 1%, with all due respect to Mr. BK Garg, I'm not going.
You're not willing to pay. You're not willing to pay.
No, I'm not saying I'm not willing to pay. I'm saying that at the moment, situation is to boost the demand, to see that the demand is increasing in the market. And this borrowing looks to me a very reasonable way. Increasing the time period looks to me reasonable way. Even this 14%, whatever decided, we can think of once again, go back and check out between center and state what best can be done, so that whatever this biggest reform we have done in the country should not be undone. That would be my take.
So let me to my colleague, Mr. Vijay Kumar. Perhaps he will be a little more kinder, to some of the seen goods. And so, sir,
kinder to whom? Anyway, sir, I like the way Mr. Bimal Jain said about renegotiation. It seems even lawyers are now renegotiating their fees.
Yes.
Mr. Harish Salve recently said that never in my career I had a client who asked for a reduction in fees. It happened only now. And he said earlier, if somebody had told me that, I would have thrown a tantrum. But now I agree to it. So maybe what he says is, when even lawyers are ready to reduce their fees, why can't the states reduce their stake a little?
Right, sir, correct.
Yeah, I think that's what Mr. Bimal Jain means.
Well, that's it, yes.
And I think there's a lot of support for Mr. Singh's idea of extending the
Period of
cess for maybe indefinitely. But sir, I don't think you can extend that period after 5 years only with the consent of the GST Council. And the GST Council is not going to say, you collect it for another 5 years, but don't pay me. So as long as you collect it, the states will insist that they also get. After all, Mr. Najib Shah once said, that there would have been no opposition for this GST cess from the states, because after all, it's a fund collected for them. So this whole thing is meant for them. It's not for the center to add to the consolidated fund of India. But I think we are all talking about a lot of things like increasing the tax, decreasing the tax, the base, and things like that. But I think you have rightly asked the question, what do we do now?
Yes.
And so right now we have to do something. You can't wait for 5 years for the economy to improve and then wait for the states to collect their cess. No. Today you have to do something. And maybe increasing the tax is not an option. So the only option may be borrowing or printing. You can't ask the government to beg and steal. So the only option that available to the government is either borrow or print. And after all, I think the amount is not all that
great amount
that is going to hit the economy so badly. You can pay the states maybe in a few installments and find the money. In any case, it is the center's responsibility, the duty of the government to pay them. How they do it is, the finance minister can't say that I don't have money for your cess, I have money for everything else. No, you'll have to find the money. And I'm sure, however serious she looks, she'll find a way.
Right, so correct. Now, so this question is again, I mean, most of the panelists have suggested, and with a clear no from Mr. Bimal Jain, the taxpayer, that okay, I mean, no more burden on me, no more onus on me, right? But fine, the re-kicking the economy, bringing it back to this some kind of trajectory and the future buoyancy, etc. All those things are long term. The question is that most of the states are having very serious deficit ranging between 40 to 60%. Good number of them are finding it a little difficult to pay salary to their own employees also. Leave aside welfare scheme, development scheme, and even providing food and funding for the corona camps. Leave aside that. Public health in any case is a neglected areas in many of the states. So, I mean, now the question is that whatever backlog is there, up to 31st March 2020, compensation sales had been paid. As Mr. Garg rightly said, that there was, the CAG pointed out, and the IGST fund was appropriated. Wrongly, it was credited to the Consolidated Fund of India. And if you go by the press release last time, when the compensation was released, they clearly said that, some kind of, the fund has been taken from Consolidated Fund of India. They are not clearly saying that it was wrongly credited. But in any case, the question is April, May, June, July, and August, 5 months, and states are desperate, in dire strait. They're looking for money, and they have no option, and that is how they are asking the center to do something. So, what is the solution, for the present? Again, the borrowing. The Attorney General has rightly said that the GST Council can always take a call against the future receipt in the compensation kitty and the share of the states. They can always borrow against that. Now the future receipt. Now this Mr. Garg suggested that 16,000 crore is the requirement pre-COVID. Post-COVID it could be 18,000, 20,000 crore. 8,000 crore is the monthly collection. So there is a shortfall of in the range of 9 to 10,000 crore. So the 10,000 crore, there are two ways. One is that we can borrow 5,000 crore. And we can mobilize 5,000 crore. For mobilization, for instance, seen goods, of course, automobile is a part of the seen basket, but not necessarily seen. It is already down in dumps. They are somehow trying to recover, so we cannot touch automobile. Aerated drinks, we have the threshold of 15%, 12% rate is there. Perhaps you can increase by 1 or 2%, but not much difference because people nowadays prefer buying vegetable rather than having aerated drinks. So you can forget about other drinks you can spend on. Yes. But now the point
but the revenue doesn't come here, no?
Sir, yes, exactly. So now the question is that other products which we have, little addictive is pan, gutka, masala, chewing tobacco, smokeless tobacco, and where the tax rate, for instance, cigarette we have in the range of 47, 48%, smokeless tobacco we have in the range of 63%, and we still have the head space, as per the compulsion says also, the threshold decided. Partly maybe, not too much that they also die. The whole idea is to mobilize revenue, not to kill them. So, I mean, there can be, partly some revenue coming from that. And presently the basket of products which could be brought under this, the compensation cess kitty, it cannot be discussed and finalized right now at this stage because every sector is in trouble. So the fact that Corona is roiling every sector and we have to take a call. I mean, what option you have for generating revenue? I mean, that is how, because again, the borrowing is against the future receipt in the compensation kitty and a part of your share, as you state. So, I mean, if the council is going to decide and authorize and perhaps recommend it, council can only recommend, then the central government has to take a call on this. So, I mean, how exactly it will work, sir? I mean, we are trying to find a solution for the present, not for the future. All of us are talking about future, not the present. The present is a little more serious and, I mean, I think that, I have this input here. The parliament in 2017 rejected an amendment which was proposed to put obligations on the central government to pay from Consolidated Fund of India to meet the GST compensation shortfall. So 2017 amendment is there, where it was proposed an amendment and that amendment was rejected by the parliament. So that option is also gone. So the only option which appears realistic is the borrowing. GST Council can recommend borrowing and the central government will have to take again under Article 293(3), sir. Because only the central government can take a call, but it is up to them. They might say no. I mean, because again, the liability onus will be on the center. Because they will be a guarantor. So, I mean, it's a very tricky situation. I mean, it's a catch-22 situation. But we have to find a solution. And if we experts cannot do this, then 100% the politicians will be able to do this. But then Mr. Bimal Jain will not be too happy. Because the onus will come. So maybe Mr. Arkaisen would like to suggest something, sir. I mean, these are the factual positions which I thought, sir, I will bring it to your notice.
Mr. Singh need to unmute.
Yes, sir. You have to unmute, sir. Audio,
Oh, sorry.
yes.
As you said, automobile is in dumps and therefore no more tax there. But pan masala, we have some headway. If you look at it from the political angle, you are directly supporting the rich class and taxing the poor class. Well, those kind of solutions actually have social costs. Pan masala is consumed by whom? The poor class. So let's not go haywire on the sin good concept, which are already very heavily taxed. At this juncture, as everybody has agreed, it's not possible to increase the taxes. Borrowing is an option because the stream of income to repay is available right in the Act. And the Act itself says compensation has to be paid out of the compensation cess fund.
Right.
So that fund has to be augmented.
Right.
And that fund can be augmented only by those funds which the GST Council approves. So I keep saying that it has to be seen a problem which is jointly of center and state and not of center. Because everywhere the decision is that of GST Council. How much to borrow, how much to tax, how to borrow, how much compensation to accept. I mean, the GST Council will have to show sagacity to, number one, somehow agree for some amount of lower compensation, then allow borrowing, and then everything will be sorted out because we'll be able to repay because there'll be a stream of income coming in.
Right, sir. So let me go to Mr. Vaitheeswaran. So GST Council naturally itself cannot borrow because they are not a legal entity in that way. It's a constitutional entity, but they don't.
Correct. Yeah, they can recommend.
So they can recommend. That means that these states will have to borrow.
No, that's not necessary. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Right.
See, instead of states borrowing,
Central can borrow.
if the center borrows, states will be happier. That will actually build confidence. That will actually build trust. That yes, center is taking the responsibility of borrowing and they're paying us. And therefore, let us allow them to continue with the levy of cess for a period longer than 5 years. So that they can repay. After all, they have to repay. So that will be in every which way a positive solution rather than asking every state to go and borrow and fend for themselves.
Right, sir. So, but ultimately, sir, that borrowing has to be serviced from the fund coming from the KT, the compensation fund.
Absolutely.
Right, sir. So the compensation fund, in any case, that fund is to be utilized for making good of the shortfall. And maybe, the GST Council can always take a decision. Either center could borrow, or maybe they authorize the states, those who are in the shortfall to borrow. Because, perhaps most of the states are there, but tomorrow some of the states will be out of this shortfall, and perhaps only a few will remain there. So maybe, sir, that is something a call with the GST Council,
Yeah.
But, I'm saying the same good again, sir, what I'm saying that, for instance, this BD, for instance, which was very, very minimal levy was there, but again, BD is again smoked by a good number of poor people, but it has a direct linkage with the poverty. But, it's not that, they don't smoke BD. If there are more taxes, perhaps the consumption will go down, because there's a lot of scientific studies will indicate that, the increase in the tax rate or the MRP or the price, 1% will bring down almost 0.5% decline in the consumption. So at least, because it has a cost to the public health infrastructure, sir. And today in Corona time, I think, that is one area which is so badly neglected, the public health infrastructure, where everybody suffers. It's not the concept of rich and poor, everybody suffers. Even the rich are suffering. Because if you are rich and you have Corona, and if you go to one of the luxury, hotels, the hospitals, in fact, I call them hotels, they charge you, as much as a poor person can perhaps, spend in a government hospital or in a non-government hospital. So, I'm just looking at purely from the revenue perspective, sir. Whatever revenue could come in the kitty, against that revenue only, because that revenue will be utilized for servicing the borrowing, which tomorrow, if resorted to overcome this shortfall issue, perhaps that could be one solution, sir. Maybe other solutions could be what all of you suggested, but those solutions are long-term solution. But the problem is, so immediate and so close to hand. So, something has to be done now, sir. So maybe it's the last round of comments. Anybody? Yes.
Mr. Shailendra, just to respond to what you rightly pegged and what Mr. Garg also talked about. Interestingly, because of this meeting, I did spend some time reading all the minutes of the GST Council and it is interesting that whatever we are discussing now have all been threadbare discussed, including a scenario where funds are not available in the compensation fund. Like in one of the meetings, one of the statements have suggested that in case the compensation fund does not have money, how will the compensation come? And the solutions were discussed as to whether borrowing can be recommended, what could be the methodology for going forward, whether the period of 5 years can be extended for the collection. All these things are minuted. Very interestingly, therefore, the GST Council is not going to find anything new. They're going to discuss these topics as to whether we can levy beyond a period of 5 years, or how we're going to fund this particular activity. Secondly, there are two other scenarios where cess was further debated. The center came up with this idea of cess on sugar sometime in between. And cess, the center wanted a levy of cess to be, sugar cess to be levied to protect the farmers' pricing, etc. And it was shot down by the states. And interestingly, why it was referred to a committee and of ministers, UOM. And the UOM came back saying that I think we should defer the decision because the levy of cess over and above GST is pending before the Supreme Court. Now, that was the time when Mohit Minerals had not come. Now that Mohit Minerals had come and cleared the path, the Supreme Court has said the power to levy GST includes the power to impose cess under Article 246A itself. Therefore, the levy of cess has been blessed by the Supreme Court in Mohit Minerals case as far as compensation cess is concerned. So it is of utmost importance that the center finds a solution in terms of borrowing or methodology to ensure that the compensation is paid to prevent the possibility of states exercising power under Article 246A and imposing a new cess over and above SGST. I'm not talking about SGST rate increase. There is enough potential for state to discover that if the money is not coming and not able to pay the salaries, there is some way they have to survive. They will look at a possible solution. So somebody could come with some kind of cess to get over the tide. To prevent those kind of distortions, it is all the more important that the center does the borrowing, and that borrowing should be used to fund. I don't think center would be keen to increase this compensation payout beyond 5 years. They would like to close the topic and test it once and for all, and not allow the 5 years to become 10 years. So they would probably like to look at a quick solution to ensure that money is taken out through borrowing. Borrowing would be one source. And here I'm talking out of experience. I'm not completely ruling out the possibility of a corona cess. There could be a corona cess in an all-pervasive corona cess where money could go to the consolidated fund, and from the consolidated fund, amounts would go to this compensation, because that's what the Compensation Act says. Compensation cess collections and amounts transferred to this fund. Therefore, the amounts could be transferred from the consolidated fund or some other collection mechanism which is done. And the corona cess is, I'm sure it will be done for other, it could be a combination of factors. It could be to help the states, it could be help public health infrastructure, it could be ensured to get back the economy back on track. While I fully agree that the taxpayer is not going to be very happy about the fact that there are further levies, but in the country we have seen clean energy cess, we have we have seen all kinds of cess we have seen, right? From the days of Garg war, we have seen such charges. So this cess is not going to be a new invention. Probably the name might be innovative or creative, but I see something like that happen.
Right, sir. Wonderful, sir.
I would like to comment,
please,
if you allow me for 2 minutes.
Please.
See, any cess by new name, like corona cess, like Mr. Vaitheeswaran said, maybe. But I'm saying that GST is not envisaged with the new kind of cess and surcharge. GST was, envisaged that GST would be subsuming all the, major indirect taxes, surcharge and cess. What I'm saying that, yes, this is a crisis, shortfall situation, and center has to compensate to the state, no denial to it. But at this point of time, I will not suggest something coming by new name corona cess just to compensate it to the state. What we are suggesting to mobilize the fund, we have two ways to look at. Maybe they can sit down and renegotiate the 14% rate, or they can renegotiate the extension of time period for getting this compensation beyond 5 years, which I've heard that some of the state has gone to 15 Finance Commission and suggested that this would be extended to 3 more years till 2024-25. So I'm saying that we have to work out some alternative way rather than coming with a new levy, new cess by new name. That is not helping us. After all, what you have to do, we all have to do. I'm not saying that trade, industry and commerce. Trade, industry, commerce is the basis of revenue collection. Unless it is being supported and it is being really given a boost from both center and state, you will not be able to collect the revenue. I would like to highlight one more factor which was not discussed at all, but that could have been the better way to really look at revenue leakages. Revenue shortfall. We have seen around 60,000 crore rupees revenue loss only because of tax evasion. Because initially when GST got introduced, I'm just highlighting this is an indirect issue, but 60,000 crore as a revenue leakage as a tax evasion. Why it has happened in GST regime? In GST regime, we thought of there would be 3 returns, GSTR1, GSTR2, GSTR3. Had it continued, what happened? GSTR 2 and 3 is being withdrawn because our infrastructure was not ready. And then 2-3%, those who are tax evader, they have made money, and around 60,000 crore rupees has gone as a leakage to the revenue collection. I'm saying that we have to really look at our own system of collecting the money and then making out this revenue loss, which we are looking at. But levy by new name, cess by new name, surcharge by new name, or putting something on sin product. I see Mr. Shailendra ji 3-4 times he have stressed on that why can't we increase that cess on tobacco. And you have also given reason that 22% in the taxes charge on BDs, lot of opportunity, WHO recommendation, 75% of retail price, cigarette 49%, smokeless tobacco product 49.5%. There is scope exists, but we have to look at with this increase of cess, are we really in a position, reaching to a position where we can compensate? Maybe for the interim measure, you can talk and discuss about this point, but you have to look at industry growth and development. Industry has got employment, infrastructure, many things are related to it. Unless you see that the industry is growing and getting properly, because industry is not only for revenue collection, it is giving you employment, it is giving you infrastructure, it is giving you ancillary activities, which is promoting all around. So I'm saying that even renegotiation of this 14%, when we as a lawyer, Mr. Vijay Kumar has rightly picked up, and he has taken the example of Mr. Hari Salve. During this crisis situation, when a lawyer like Mr. Hari Salve renegotiating the fees, why can't center and state come together and find a solution?
Let me tell you. I had a very detailed discussion on this, the pan masala, tobacco, and when India was a signatory to WHO framework convention for this tobacco control, and there are lots of global studies now which clearly indicate that long-term cost, economic cost to the economy and society is much higher and public health. For instance, India is fast becoming the cancer hub in the world. Again, thanks to smoking and chewing a smokeless tobacco, etc., etc. And in fact, most of the studies indicate that this is a facade, that you generate employment, you generate economic activities, etc., etc. All those things actually is costing the economy and society at large. And what about EU? You don't smoke. Have you calculated the cost in EU? You have not calculated the cost. A lot of, those studies are there, and I am not looking at from, I'm not an activist, so I'm just looking at from that angle. It's not my personal preference, but I'm just looking at from purely revenue generation, that it's a do and die situation where, states may break away, or as Mr. Vaitheeswaran rightly suggested, some states tomorrow decide to levy certain cesses, etc. on their own. That will create a chaos, which you are scared of cess. And right now we are not discussing about the original design. It's a totally extraordinary situation thanks to Corona. Apart from before Corona also, economic slowdown, etc., those factors were manageable. But today, we are down in dumps, and some situation, some solution has to be worked out in some way, little more realistic. And even if 1,000 crore or 2,000 crore comes from little extra, the hike in cess, you see, given a preference, you see, some of the state finance ministers have suggested that certain items which were removed or shifted from 28% basket to 18% basket. You remember that? Some of the white goods. They are saying that why not to levy compensation cess on those goods? Now you tell me, where exactly do you stand between tobacco and that? Perhaps you will require a couple of cigarettes, to think about it. So you see that if those white goods are brought under this compensation cess, as the state finance minister is demanding, and they are very clear, they have also calculated how much revenue will come. Let me tell you, the sales are down. I know that sales are down. Industry is in a bad shape. White goods, electronic goods, etc. But the fact that if we have to choose between two bad things, let's go for the one which is worse. But that is how I'm looking at it. Because again, the borrowing, you have a lot of debt servicing. The center itself is concerned, and again, this feeling is there that yes, compensation has to be paid, but the GST Council has to find the solution. There is unanimity here between the center and the states both. And Attorney General, being the law officer, might have given a legal solution, but the politicians will have to work out a political solution. And that political solution could be, as rightly pointed out by Mr. Vaitheeswaran, the cess. You are saying that GST law or cess is not welcome, Corona cess, fine, forget about it. They will say that forget about new cess, I am just talking about compensation cess. Let me extend it. What do you do then? The law permits you. They issue a notification and more goods are brought under it. So idea is that what finally comes out, what is there on the floor for us now? What solution lies there, for the GST Council? And borrowing is, yes, one solution which all of us agree, and that could be a good pragmatic step, but not 100% borrowing. Look at the kind of shortfall we have, Mr. Vijay suggested. That kind of borrowing will be too much. And now the partly, again, we cannot expect the sovereign to borrow, and pay each other. Sovereign is the one which will levy, which will impose tax on you. You have to think in terms of that. If tomorrow there is a corona infection, then you have to think in terms of, yes, sovereign is offering you a hospital, but you will say that let me go to Max, let me go to Fortis, let me go to some private hospital, Apollo perhaps. You think in terms of that, depending on your ability to take care of it. So similarly here, maybe sir, you last comment, sir, before we wrap up. We are very close to this deadline, and idea is to come up with some recommendations for the council.
Shailendra, shall I say a few things?
Sir, please, sir.
Just see, the first thing, I think we are creating an impression as if tax per se is bad for the industry and consumers. I have, from my experience, learned the worst tax is the inflation. It hits the poor man. It is very quiet. It hits the industry also in the long run. When you leave the deficit, everybody suffers. So it's not a good suggestion not to cover the gap. The second point is 14% a very high claim? My understanding is no. Center was having a GDP increase of 7 point some percentage in those years. Inflation used to be around 4 or 4.5%. In the normal course, it was about 12%. Center said GDP will go up by 1.5 to 2%. They were making these tall claims. And when GST rates are cut, the income tax and customs go up. People import more, people make more profit. So therefore, all that money has been got credited into the Consolidated Fund of India in the form of other taxes. Now, moreover, ever since GST has been launched, Center has been imposed collecting their taxes more and more in the form of cess. Now, take petroleum, for example, very little is being collected in the form of basic excise duty. Maybe 90% revenue has now started coming in the form of cess, which Center alone retains. 42% is not shared by the states. Take income tax surcharge. Huge amount is coming in the form of cess or surcharge. It is not being shared with the states. So sum total of GST compensation plus devolution, in fact, it will come to an effective compensation of only 10%. So when states are demanding 14%, there is no harm in saying some amount of money should come from the Consolidated Fund of India. That money is actually the GST money, which has accrued to center in the name of another tax. That's the point states would be arguing. Point number 3. See, in this Mohit Minerals case, Supreme Court has said that center has the powers to impose assess. What was not argued before that case and will become extremely important is, if this is a GST and if it is being collected like center, then 42% of it is supposed to be shared with the states before center does anything with that cess. So if you stretch this collection beyond 5 years, many states will ask, I don't require a compensation. I have reached my target. I'm a very efficient state. Why should I provide a money of which some portion legitimately belongs to me because it would have got subsumed into CGSTs and SGST? Why should I allow that money to go to the other states? They will lay their claim on that. So you have to leave an incentive for a state to become efficient. Right now, there is an insurance. Whatever you do, whatever you don't do, center has kind of given them a guarantee that this money will come. So that's not a very good model to have. So in my understanding, we have to balance all these various factors and see that the solution is good for the country, optimally implementable, does not cause inflation, makes states stand on their feet. Now let's take a case, center has enough money to give compensation. Center agrees to borrow also. Should that money be given to the states? Nobody is arguing this. Take a state like Punjab. We may have a deficit of 65% at the end of 5 years. How will we survive in 2023 and 24? Do we have such short-term perspective that we are just thinking of compensation and nothing beyond that? I would like to be able to stand on my own legs. State after state will have cliff falls. Then they will rush to somebody that, okay, I'm not able to pay salaries, I'm not able to pay pensions, I'm not able to do debt servicing. Do you want the country's sovereign ratings to go down? Where will be the industry? And I really don't understand this practice that, okay, we look at one issue from one dimension only, is fraught with dangers. And therefore, I would like to place on record issue is far more complicated, multidimensional, requires multiple expertises, and not easy to handle. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, sir. Let me go to Mr. Najib Shah for a last comment. Sir, are you around, sir?
Yeah, I'm around.
Yes, sir.
No, I've heard VK with great interest. You see, we are looking at solutions now. Some solutions are immediately required because every state will be looking forward to receiving some money. And as I've consistently been mentioning, I think the center would do well to ensure, Vijay Kumar has told, we can't possibly steal, but they will do anything possible to ensure that they reach out to the states and give some money immediately. You can't have a situation where months together you have not given them any money, and that has to be met from any source, and that source can be, the center has a huge array of sources with it. It should ensure that it builds that trust and gives them some money forthwith, so that, and it should be done before this GST Council meeting, in my opinion, simply because then the meeting itself can go more smoothly if you have given them some money upfront and said, look, these are my problems, these are my concerns, and solutions are multiple. I mean, you have talked of increasing your rates, you have talked of increasing the coverage of goods. This crisis is an opportunity for you to look at all of these solutions, which you otherwise could not have broached with. You have talked of, the Guwahati meeting, which brought in this huge number of goods from 28 to 18. You can look at all those goods and say that, look, let us try to impose a cess on those goods yes, multiple solutions are there. A solution has to be found. And Shailendra, I need to peel off because I've got something at 5:15. I've got a call to make. Right? It's been a pleasure to be with all of you all.
So
all
nice.
the best. And let us look forward to what solution they come out with.
Fine,
Thank
sir.
you.
So, sir. Sure,
sir.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thank you for making it, sir. So,
Thank
yes,
you
sir.
so much. I'll get out of the meeting.
Please, sir. Please carry on, sir. So any other inputs, sir, coming from anybody, Mr. K Singh, Mr. Bimal Jain, any solution will give pain to Mr. Bimal Jain, so I will not bother him right now. So Mr. Vaitheeswaran has rightly suggested that there is a possibility of CES, etc. I mean, that could be. Some of the states have gone for Corona CES already. I mean, maybe other items. For instance, petroleum products, they have done some of the Northeast states. So, I mean, overall, yes, the issues are very complex and multidimensional, and solution therefore has to be multidimensional. It cannot be just unidirectional solution. Maybe hiking the rate on certain items, those to be decided by the council. Whether it is tobacco or non-tobacco, whichever sector it is, at this time, everybody will feel hurt. No doubt about it, because the sales are down, the economy will take some more months to be back on feet, and Corona is roiling every sector. Profit, in any case, forget about profit, because the sales itself are not happening. But a solution has to be found out. Borrowing could be one option. So maybe post GST Council meeting we will connect again, and I will request Mr. Vijay Garg also, sir, to spare some time. And maybe we could discuss those solutions with I'm pretty sure I have a lot of trust and confidence in the political wisdom of our state finance minister and union finance minister. They will certainly work out something, some decent and appreciable solution and some exit route. So thanking you all for making it today, sir, and for insightful views.
Thank you, Mr. Shailendra, and
Thank
wonderful
you.
meeting all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to all panelists. Thank you.